Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, or maybe good evening, depending on where you are joining us from in the world today. My name is Nikki, and I am here today to talk to you about the IELTS Writing Task 1. Now, this is the second workshop in the series. I really hope that you also joined us for the first installment, which was based on the IELTS speaking part 2. And just tell you a little bit more about what we will be looking at today in our masterclass. Now, there is going to be a lot of information today coming your way in quite a short space of time. So I really recommend that you take a few screenshots. You will see a little camera on some of the screens, some of the slides that I recommend you screenshot so that you can look at them at other points during the session. As I said, there's a lot of information today, so I really recommend we go screen-free for the next 35 minutes. What do I mean by that? Well, don't switch off gallery teachers, okay? Keep gallery teachers on, but please give yourself a little break. Give your dog a treat and send him to the other room. Turn off your WhatsApp, turn off your emails, and just give your brain a break so that it can fully focus on the IELTS writing part 1. Okay, everybody. So what are we going to look at today? Well, we are going to be analyzing the requirements of the first part of the writing section of IELTS. We will be considering some common errors. We will be identifying some tips and also some pitfalls. And finally, my principal aim of this session is to try to increase your confidence as teachers or as students to be able to better manage this high stakes exam. And very importantly, we are looking at the academic module, okay? So there are 2 possible IELTS exams. There is a general training and there is an academic module. For the speaking and the listening, there is no difference. However, for the writing, there is a very large difference. So we are focusing today on the academic module. Okay, so let's get started. Now, just before we get into the nitty-gritty of the writing section, you may be thinking, well, who is this lady and why on earth should I listen to her? Well, my name is Nikki Partridge, and I am located in the United Kingdom. I'm a native speaker of English. I'm actually based in Cardiff in Wales. And I am also the owner of an accredited language school, Pear Tree Languages. You have all of my details there. It would be great to connect with you, so please do feel free to reach out. But perhaps even more importantly than my school or my location is the fact that I have been involved in teaching and assessing IELTS for around 20 years. I'm giving away my age a little bit there. Okay, so I really do hope that you will take on board my experience and my advice to be able to become better practitioners of IELTS Part 1 writing. All right, so what are the requirements? Well, the IELTS writing exam is 1 hour in total, okay? There are 2 tasks. The first task, which is the one we are looking at today, this is the part we are unpicking today, is 150 words, and the candidate should spend 20 minutes on this part of the test, okay? The second part, task 2, we will be looking at in the 3rd installment of this masterclass series, so stay tuned for that. Keep your eye on your email. That part is 250 words and it is 40 minutes. So students should spend around 40 minutes on that part of the exam, making a grand total of 1 hour. The candidates will receive a band score from 1 to 9 for the entire test, okay? So there is not a separate score for task 1 and task 2. There is one total band score from 1 to 9. Don't worry if this idea of band scores is new to you, because this is something that we are going to be delving into in more detail as the session goes on. Okay, and perhaps key at this point, a key thing to keep in mind is that task 2 is worth more than task 1. Okay, so this is reflected in the recommended timings that candidates should spend. You can more or less, rule of thumb, imagine that task 2 is worth about 2/3 of the marks and task 1 is worth around 1/3 of the marks. Okay, so when you are advising your students about how much energy, how much time, how much effort to put into these tasks, it's really important to keep that in mind, because obviously if a candidate were to spend 30 minutes on task 1, that only leaves them with 30 minutes for task 2, which is worth more marks. So essentially they are disadvantaging themselves by doing that. Okay, so timing is really important. We talked about this a lot in the first session on speaking, and it is equally important in the second part, okay, in the writing module as well. So I mentioned the bands. Okay, so there are actually 4 bands awarded. Okay, so a candidate will essentially receive 4 marks. All right, and what are those areas? Let's take a look at them. The first area is called TA. This is task achievement. Now, we will come on later in the workshop to look in more detail at IELTS writing paper, which I believe is really, really a great tool to help your students or as a student to better prepare for this exam. You will see along the bottom of IELTS official writing paper 4 boxes, and they are labeled in this way: task achievement, TA. Okay. The next band is CC, coherence and cohesion. The third band is LR, lexical resource, and the fourth band is GR, grammar. All right. Now, we are going to look, as I mentioned, at the band descriptors in more detail, but this is essentially what they are. So task achievement, we can think of it in terms of how well the candidate has answered the task with which they have been presented. CC, coherence and cohesion, does the answer make sense? Does it flow? Does it have linking words? Does it have relative clauses? Okay. LR is vocabulary. Do they use appropriate vocabulary? Do they use a range of vocabulary? Is their spelling correct? And finally, GR, our grammar. So this is, again, a combination of accuracy and range of grammar. What you can kind of deduce from these 4 bands is that around 50% of the marks which are awarded are really general English. Okay, and this is something really important to keep in mind. There is a tendency when it comes to IELTS, especially the writing, to just focus on exam practice, which is really important as the candidate gets closer to the exam date. However, if the candidate does not have a very solid base of general English, it is extremely difficult for them to get a good grade, a good score on IELTS. So you must, if you are a teacher, really enforce onto your students that they cannot neglect their general English. Okay, lovely. All right, so the requirements of the task. So task 1 is all about data. Okay, so there are different data types with which they will be presented. They could be given a line graph, they could be given a bar chart, a table and pie chart, usually they are together, okay? They could have a simple map, or they could have a process, okay? There are slightly different techniques that you will need to teach depending on the data type. However, the principles of what the candidate needs to do, which is really what we're looking at today, are the same. There are, again, many myths around IELTS, many things that people say, all right, about which type of data is easier or more difficult, okay? As far as I'm concerned, if a candidate is well prepared, they shouldn't really find any one type of data easier or more difficult, okay? As long as they are well prepared and they understand clearly how to answer a line graph, as opposed to the types of language and staging that they will need to use for a process. It is possible that a student may have a preference. They may just enjoy writing about processes a little bit more than a line graph, but really they are of equal difficulty, let's say. All right, so let's take a look at a sample task. Okay, so this is a sample IELTS task, which is taken from the official Cambridge Guide to IELTS student book. I am actually going to give you a minute now. Okay, so I will zip it, all right, for a minute. And I would just like you to take some time just to read the information that is presented to you here on this screen. We are going to do this in a smart way, all right? So SMART is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. This is a very important technique when it comes to IELTS, where timing really is absolutely everything. So I'm going to give you a smart minute just to have a read through this task. I will be timing you, and your minute starts now. Okay, so that is the end of your minute. Okay, I hope that you use that minute productively. Now we will talk again about SMART techniques. Okay, this idea of giving students a very fixed period of time to force them to focus. Okay, but as I said, I do hope you use that minute well. You may want to screenshot at this point. Okay, so that you have this sample task at your disposal when we look at the next slides. It just isn't possible to squeeze everything into one slide. Okay, let's move on. So what are we thinking about now? What considerations do we have to take into account when we are actually thinking, pen to paper, what do I need to write? Okay, so the first thing that we really need to think about is, what is the main message? Okay, what is the overview of this data? Now, a very nice way to think about this is, imagine if a person could not see the task, okay, and you had to just take a pen, take a paper, and do a really, really quick line graph without any figures, without any facts, or you had to draw a very quick process, okay, and they couldn't see the task, but they need to get the main message, even from your quick drawing, okay? That is the overview, all right? It is the main message. It is not detail at this point, okay? The next thing we have to take into account is are the key features. So what are the key features? So we know the main message, all right? Car ownership increased. We might say bicycle use decreased, whatever it may be. But now what are the key features? Perhaps car ownership dipped in 1992. That's an exception. That's a key feature, okay? And these key features are going to be the main body of the answer. And then finally, we have to think about what supporting data needs to be included. These are actual figures, temperatures, percentages, actual numbers, okay? It's very important that the key features are supported, they are underpinned with data, all right? What we also need to do is to focus on trends, tendencies, patterns, and not details, not minute details. If there was a tiny dip in temperatures in the year 2000, this doesn't matter because we only have 150 words and we only have 20 minutes. Okay, so part of the technique is to really be able to consolidate that information into key features and main message. All right. And you have to be able to combine elements of both data sets. Okay. When we have, for example, a pie chart or a line graph and a table, as was the case in our sample task. So what I've done here is I have written a little sample, okay, a little example model answer, maybe you might want to say, for the overview, because really the overview is the key here, guys. Okay, the overview is very, very important. So cast your mind back, get your phone, have a look at your screenshot, okay, of this task that we are looking at. And this is the overview that I made, okay? So I'm going to read it aloud for you. Sydney displays the most consistent temperatures over the period, whereas New York reports the greatest number of sunny hours over the year. London is slightly warmer than New York in winter and cooler in the other months, and records far less sunshine than both other cities noted in the data. Okay, so this is our overview. This is what we could say would be the main message here. Okay. I've got a sample answer for you. This is not a model, okay? This is not a model answer. This is a real answer which was produced by one of my IELTS students with permission to use, of course. So this is an attempt by a student to actually write an overview. Now, again, you may want to screenshot this. It is always really, really useful to look at real world examples, okay? From students, from candidates who are actually sitting this exam. So what we've got here on IELTS paper as well, unfortunately you can't see the whole page because it is cut to fit the slide. But again, just take a moment or two just to read through this answer. But I want you to keep in mind the considerations that we've talked about, okay? Does this communicate the main message? And also, let's try to bring in now the other elements of lexis and grammar and CC coherence and cohesion. All right, what are your thoughts about this? So I'll just give you 10 seconds. Okay, so I hope you've got a few thoughts of your own. These are my thoughts, okay? So let's start with the positives. First of all, there is a structure, okay? There are some linking words. So we've got a very critical word here, which is overall. For me, the best way to signal to the examiner clearly that this is my overview is by using the word overall. Okay, this is a fantastic word. Now, you don't want the examiner to have to go digging and searching for the overview. The overview has to smack you, okay? And it has to be striking. And overall is a great word to do that, okay? So we've got some structure, we've got some linking words. We also have words like however. Okay, there is an attempt at some complex grammar, and there is also an attempt at some complex lexis. Okay, so we've got words like striking difference, for example. We've got the word obtained instead of get. Okay, get is a big no-no for IELTS writing. We'll talk about that more in task 2 session coming soon. Really avoid the word get. You should be encouraging your students, candidates to use obtain, become. All right. So definitely here, those are some of the positives. However, unfortunately, there are also a few negatives here. And one of those negatives is a major error. Okay. So I think you can probably see these for yourselves as accomplished teachers. So there's a problem with capitalization. The candidate may feel like that S is a capital S on the word states, but it's not. It has to touch the top line. Okay, the same with United, the same with Kingdom. Okay, also there is a faulty tense choice. This person has used have been seen, okay, rather than is seen. Also, the word order is not correct in some parts, and there is no mention of London. Okay, so there were actually 3 cities here, and London isn't mentioned at all in this overview. So really, how can we be thinking about a complete overview when London is not mentioned? But what they have done is they have used the United Kingdom as a substitute for London. They have used Australia as a synonym for Sydney. Oh dear, big problem, major error. Why? Well, quite simply, I mean, I'm not a geography teacher, but London is not the United Kingdom. Australia is not Sydney. Australia is a huge country. If we're talking about temperatures, it's very possible the temperature could have been totally different in a different part of the country. So this is inaccurate. Okay. Let's move on. Let's have a look at the candidate's first paragraph now. So again, you might want to screenshot this. I'll give you maybe 10, 20 seconds. It's a little bit longer. We'll do the same exercise. I'd like you to think about the considerations, also bringing in lexis, grammar, and CC. Okay, so I'll give you 10, 20 seconds now. Okay, so I hope you've had time to read through this calmly and make your own conclusions. So these are mine. So again, let's start with some of the positives. Again, we have some structure, we have some linking words, and we have some IELTS appropriate lexis. Some of it is even very nice. Words like respectively, dramatically, clearly as a linking word. We've got next, which shows good staging, signposting. Okay. So all of this is very positive. However, again, there are some negatives. So there are some issues with prepositions, with the structure of the sentences, again, capitalization, and of course, spelling. Okay, so there are a number of spelling errors in this sample here. All right. So do screenshot it because what we're going to do now is we are going to start to look at the band descriptors. So if you were in my first session on IELTS speaking, you will know that I've mentioned that the band descriptors are really our golden gift from IELTS, okay? All of the answers that we seek are in the band descriptors. These are our roadmap for better understanding the requirements of the exam and therefore better equipping our students with the tools they need to succeed. So you can get these band descriptors. They are public, okay? They are in the public domain from IELTS.org. So I strongly recommend that you download them, that you keep them, PDF them on your phone, whether you're waiting for a bus, just have a quick look through, okay? So that as teachers, you start to become really, really familiar with those band descriptors. So when you are giving your students feedback, you can tell them very clearly, well, unfortunately, if you make these errors of spelling, then this will be penalized in this column, okay? And you will not be able to achieve a band higher than 5 or 6 or 7, okay? And you can back that up with the band descriptors, okay? You can clearly show them this is what your examiner will be using. So let's try to satisfy these band descriptors. Let's get into the mind of the examiner, and really with the band descriptors, it is not that hard. This is far too small on the screen, so let's take a look at the first two sections in a little bit more detail. And here is where we are going to cast our minds back again, okay? Throw back to the samples that we have just looked at. And I want to just highlight with band descriptors why some of those negatives, some of those errors are so serious, okay? So the major point that I would like to convey is the point about using, for example, the word Australia as a synonym for Sydney or United Kingdom as a synonym for London. Quite simply, this is inaccurate, okay? And because it is inaccurate, if we were to look at the first column, which is task achievement, the result of doing that would mean that this candidate could not get more than band 4 on task achievement, okay? So with the bands, in order to be able to access the next band up, you must be able to satisfy all of the requirements of the previous band. If anything in the previous band is not done or is incorrect, you cannot go to the next band, even if everything else is fine, okay? So here we have this very important word, which is inaccurate, okay? So the examiner will read that task and go, okay, great answer. Yeah, there is some really, they've satisfied the number of words. They've generally satisfied the task. However, inaccurate information 4. Okay, so that is something very important to take into account. The other thing here that I would like to specifically draw attention to is the need for the overview. Okay, so if we look at the requirements of the band 5, we have this, which is the fact that they recount detail mechanically with no clear overview, okay? So if the candidate has not given a clear overview, has not summarized the main message, and has not signaled to the examiner that this is my overview using a word such as overall, they cannot get more than 5, even if the lexis, the grammar, the cohesion and coherence could be great. They may be getting 6s, 7s, or even 8s. They will fall down in this part. And of course, this will drag down the average, all right, quite significantly. Okay, so what do they need to do to get a 6? Well, they have to address the requirements of the task, and they have to present an overview with information appropriately selected, okay? Then they have to make sure that there is also that they present adequately the key features or bullet points, okay? So it is possible with band 6, you can see that some of the details may be irrelevant, inappropriate, or inaccurate, but we're talking here about something much less serious than substituting United Kingdom for London, okay? We would be talking about something like a slightly faulty statistic that they may have taken from the data. All right, if we move on to CC here, okay, so this, I would say, our candidate would have done much better on. So I would say probably something more like around the 6 band, where the ideas have been arranged, information is organized coherently, there is progression throughout the answer, okay? So again, take a good look at those band descriptors. Now, if we move on to the next 2, which are lexical resource and grammatical range and accuracy, you can see here there's a big difference between 6 and 7. And really the key to being able to get 7 is the fact that the candidate has to have range, all right? Without range, they will not progress beyond 6. Even at band 6, there's quite a lot of leeway given for some errors in grammar, okay? Attempts to use less common vocabulary, with some inaccuracy. Okay, so it is possible for a person who probably has general English of level around B2 or a low B2 to get a 6 on lexical range and grammatical accuracy, but to get that magic 7, they need to also have range, and they need to have their basic errors well under control. Okay, so we are coming to the end now of our session today, but I would like to leave you with some of my top tips for helping your students succeed in their IELTS Task 1 writing, okay? So my first top tip is that you should teach formulaic language, okay? This is a great way for a candidate to go into the exam feeling more confident, feeling like, yeah, I've got this in the bag because I already have a number of structures in mind that I know I can insert regardless of what the topic is. Okay, but you must not encourage students to memorize whole answers. Again, if you use IELTS writing paper, you will see there is a little box on the bottom for memorization. And if the examiner feels that the answer has been memorized, they can tick that box and they will be severely penalized. Okay, so they must not memorize an entire answer. So it's important to build banks of synonyms to minimize repetition. Repetition is a really big problem on Task 1. Candidates tend to use the same language over and over again, dramatic, increase, decrease. Try to encourage them to have banks of synonyms, all right, that they can use in their writing. Try to encourage them not to use the same word twice, okay? Next, I have already mentioned this, but I do believe it's worth saying again, share the band descriptors with students. Ask them to construct their answers that fulfill the criteria at their target band in 4 sections. Ask them to peer correct, ask them to self-correct and say, okay, now if you are an examiner, do you think your answer satisfies all of the criteria of band 4 for task achievement, for example? No, why not? Okay, let's do it again. So this time we're going to aim at band 5. Okay, so share those band descriptors with your students so that they can apply some critical thinking to their own answers. I have already mentioned this, but I'm going to mention it now in more detail. Use IELTS writing paper to help the students become familiar with the format and control their word count. Word count is really important. If the student doesn't write enough words, they will be penalized, okay? There is no penalty for writing too many words, which is often a question I'm asked, which is, can they write more words? Yes, of course they can. However, you have to take into account that the more words they write, the more time they take, which means they reduce the amount of time they have for checking, okay? And also, the more words they write, the more chance there is they could start to slip up and make errors, okay? So do encourage your students to reach the word count. They must reach the word count, but do not encourage them to write many, many, many more words. If you have a very prolific student who's able to write and write and write, then you need to encourage them. You need to tell them that they do need to stop. And if they find themselves with an extra 5 or 10 minutes, brilliant. Use that time to check their work, okay? So using IELTS paper is really helpful because they will be able to get a visual of how much they have written without having to count the words, okay? So at the beginning, you tell them, count the words, count the words, count the words. But after doing this a few times, practice, 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 they will just visually, oh, okay, I've written a page and a half. So in my handwriting, I know, I feel quite comfortable that I have done 150 words, okay? And finally, you should make all practice SMART. So SMART is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Every time you give a task, and a practice exam task, you must make the students time themselves, or you should time them, okay? Make sure the tasks that you give them are achievable. This is very important, that people who are not yet at band 6 in their general English, but need band 6, don't start them with band 6 expectations, okay? Start them a little bit lower down to build up their confidence in a smart way, all right? Make sure they measure their own progress, they measure their own success. This is all very important in terms of helping your students build their confidence and be able to get the result that they need. Fine. And the major pitfall, okay? Task 1 is not subjective. This is a very, very, very major pitfall on IELTS Task 1. IELTS Task 1 is data, invented data. If the candidate includes any irrelevant or additional or opinion-based information, they will be penalized, okay? They need to avoid language such as surprisingly, incredibly, interestingly, because this implies an opinion, okay? So if they say incredibly, car ownership increased in the year 1990, why is that incredible? It's just data. Maybe it's incredible, maybe it's not, but that's irrelevant, okay? So if they do that, they will be penalized in task achievement, okay? And sometimes IELTS can be tricky. We all know this. And IELTS lays little traps, okay? And sometimes it can be really, really tempting to give a point of view on the data, okay? Especially if it's around topics like health, okay? People will say, well, of course it's like that, because we all know that cycling is good for our health. Ooh, this is a big no-no, because here we have introduced an opinion. Okay, so please encourage your students not to do that. And finally, just before I end my session, once again, I would like to encourage you to download and familiarize yourself with the band descriptors. Okay, this really is your key to success. So thank you very much for listening to me. There are many, many, many more workshops available on Gallery Teachers, which I would ask you to please watch. There are some useful websites as well for ELT resources. And from my side, I would like to very sincerely thank you for giving me your time today and for listening. And I look forward to taking your questions in our question and answer session. Thank you very much. So one of the very frequently asked questions is, what should a student really focus on if they join an IELTS class a little bit late or they have very limited time before their exam? So if we just keep in mind IELTS Writing Task 1, which is the subject of this specific workshop, because IELTS is a massive topic. So we'll just rein that in a little bit. Let's assume that they have the principles of the exam under control, okay? Because fundamentally, they must have the principles of the exam under their belts, okay? As they approach the day of the examination. But really what they need to be doing in those final days or hours is exam practice, okay? Smart exam practice, so timed exam practice. There is still some time to learn some formulaic language or some IELTS specific lexis. Again, as with all language acquisition, as a teacher, you should be encouraging your students to focus on a few items of lexis. Don't present them with a list of 100 words 2 hours before the exam and say, learn this. No, tell them, learn respectively, learn a dramatic increase, and learn a significant decrease. Okay, so give them very smart aims and smart practice, but it's all about, you know, I've used this metaphor before. IELTS is a bit like training for a sporting event. Okay, so what are you going to do in the final moments before you run that race? You're going to be doing your stretching, and in the final days before the race, you're going to be just doing time practice, time practice, time practice. Okay, so this would be my main piece of advice in answer to that question. Moving on to a second very frequently asked question. This relates to using lesson time to actually practice writing and whether or not that is a productive use of lesson time. Okay, so my answer would be yes, it is a productive use of lesson time. Okay. What is really important with any course, with any set of lessons, is to set expectations. So we can assume that you've done some kind of either one-to-one needs assessment or a class needs assessment. And as part of that needs assessment, you will have identified that students need to do writing practice. So you can then move to a phase of trying to negotiate a little bit the syllabus with your student or your students. So together with some persuasion on your part, some pushing them in the right direction, you negotiate between you that writing practice is needed, okay? And then you set the expectation that once a week or one in every 4 classes, or of course depends very much on the nature of the course, the frequency, you will be doing writing practice in the class. Okay, so in this way, the expectation is clear in the mind of the student. So first of all, it's negotiated, so they have input into their own learning, so they feel like they're in control. They feel like, well, it was my suggestion, so that's good. I'm happy to do writing in class. And from the teacher's point of view, the expectation is very clear. And why it is important to do writing in class is because timing is everything in IELTS. And can you really trust that your student is timing themselves in the right way when they do their homework? Now, this could be because your student has 3 children, okay? And they are very busy. And it is just simply impossible in the house to time themselves in the right way, to give themselves that space without the distractions of home life. It could be because, and let's speak frankly, your student is a little bit lazy and they don't always do their homework, and you can't really trust that they are going to do it at home. So if you don't do it in class, when on earth are you going to do it? Okay. And if you have students in your class who really, you can really put your hand on your heart and say, no, I know this student always does their homework in the right way. They time themselves. They use IELTS paper. They analyze band descriptors. Oh, I feel a bit bad making them do IELTS writing in class. Give them something else to do. Okay. So while you have your students who need that discipline of the classroom environment to do valuable practice are doing that, do something else with those types of students who perhaps do have better self-study skills. So don't be afraid. I know it's daunting. You feel, I'm being paid to just sit here while they write. No, it's really, really valuable. All right, so the third question that we are going to look at today relates to the use of dictionaries in the classroom environment and whether or not that is counterproductive. So dictionaries are just a way of acquiring new lexis, okay? If you don't know the word, you have to find it from somewhere, and a dictionary is a great place to find it from. But really, it's not about whether or not to allow students to use dictionaries in class, not while they're doing exam practice, but while they are just acquiring their IELTS knowledge. The question really is what you do with that lexis when they have looked it up in the dictionary. This is really key here. So there are lots of things that you can do, but the most important thing is that that language is recorded, okay? It's collected, and it's also checked. Okay, so first of all, you need to encourage good recording techniques for your students. Then you need to collect it. Now, if John has looked up a word, it's very possible that Jane may also benefit from knowing that word. So as a class, collect the language. If you're in a face-to-face context, that could be in a language box, okay? So you encourage the students to help each other with acquiring lexis. You put it in your language box, once every couple of lessons, you pull out a word and you ask them to explain, what does increase mean? How would you use this in a sentence? Okay. If you are one-to-one or online, you can do that using asynchronous tools to collect vocabulary. The next thing is that that vocabulary has to be checked. Okay. So there are many, many new teaching techniques, but there are also some really good old techniques which we shouldn't forget about. What about a spelling test? Okay, this may sound a little bit old school, but spelling tests are great, and students really like them because, first of all, they have to learn the spellings, and secondly, many people are quite competitive. If you set this up, if you gamify it, if you set it up like a game, like a challenge, and maybe you bring in some technology, some online quiz technology, it can be really, really fun to check spelling. And what you do then is you achieve the ultimate goal, which is that student acquires that piece of lexis. The fact that the dictionary was the jumping off point for acquiring that lexis is just great.